Good morning, everyone. Before we start today's session, please feel free to do event check-in. This will give you access to additional resources and information about events that we are running on Reactor, which are around similar topics to today's session. Also, you will be able to access links from today's session. I will share the event check-in link with the event ID in the Q&A section shortly. Thank you all once again for joining us today. My name is Rashmata and I'm the event planner for Microsoft Reactor Bengaluru, India. This session will run over the next 3 hours, including Q&A. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Reactor YouTube channel. I will share the link to our YouTube channel in the chat section soon. Quick word on a code of conduct. We display this at all Microsoft Reactor events that we run, and it's just a reminder to be aware of others. Key thing to take out here is to be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout and we do encourage you all to participate. Also, please keep your mics muted during the session. I would now like to welcome Mamta, our speaker for today's session. She is an enterprise architect with an author with 17 years of IT experience, skilled cloud solution architect with 9+ years of hands-on experience migrating, automating, and optimizing mission-critical deployments in various cloud platforms. Currently, she is working in the TechScalable as co-founder. But for now, I will hand over to Mamta to begin the session. Over to you, Mamta.
Thanks, Rashmita. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Hey, hi, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing good and safe. Thanks for joining the session today. Don't be astonished thinking that the page is blank. Normally, I don't like to use PPTs. That's a reason. I don't have anything showing up over here. So we'll start with the agenda. I have noted down, there were 2 questions. I've noted down them. And when we are in that particular topic, I'll be surely covering those. So today's agenda is, there were a lot of keywords, right? Build. Then there was a keyword called as deploy in the topic. And there was another keyword called as Dockerized, web application. And then there was Kubernetes. We would be using Azure Kubernetes, and that's the reason I've picked up this. And we had mentioned using Azure DevOps. So these are the important keywords which we would be addressing today. So we would be having a .NET application that we would be building and we would be deploying. Our application is containerized. So our front-end application is .NET and I have Azure SQL at the back end. So we would integrate these two as well. So we would learn how to set up a connection. This application is working in or running in AKS cluster as a container. That's our motto, to deploy that as a container in an AKS cluster. And when we know we are Dockerizing anything, we have a associated image related to that, right? A Docker image. So that Docker image would be saved in ACR. So ACR will also come into picture as your container registry. And we have Azure SQL as well. So Azure Container Registry, AKS is going, pulling the image from ACR and then deploying it. We will try to first build things manually, and then we would bring Azure DevOps into picture. In our Azure DevOps, we would be setting up a project. In that project, we would be having our code residing in Azure Repos. And then we would be building up Azure DevOps pipeline. We would do the YAML way of it. And we would be automating this entire stuff, building and deploying of the web application. to AKS cluster. That's the agenda for the day. Hope everyone is good with it. Just let me check if we have any questions. Okay, cool. So let's start with it. For doing the building and the other part of it, I would be bringing up another workstation. You can call that as a bastion host or a jump server or a workstation, whatever it is. I would call it as a workstation. This workstation would be a CentOS workstation. And in this, I would be deploying a couple of stuffs. So I'll be deploying .NET. I would be deploying Azure command line interface. I would be deploying Kubernetes command line interface so that I can interact with my cluster. I would be deploying Docker so that I can do a Docker build manually. And then I also would be deploying, let me just give it a thought, anything else which I would be needing there. Yes, Git would be there. Yeah, I think these are the things which would be needed. And I have the project link of my Azure repos. I'll be sharing that in the chat so that you also get the code base and everything. And if you want to perform the lab sometime later, looking into the video, you should be able to do that. So these are the things. And this would be my point wherein I would be sitting and developing my application and then building and deploying it. Once we would do it manually. So we would be interacting. We would be setting up these. This is my Azure cloud account. And this is my Azure DevOps account. So a lot of stuffs are there. My Azure DevOps pipeline needs integration with AKS. It needs integration with ACR. It needs integration with my Azure account as well. So all those things also we got to set up along with the project. It's just not creating a project and having a repository. It would not work. We will have to integrate so that my pipeline understands where is my Kubernetes cluster, where do I push the image to, and which is that account with which we would be interacting. So let's start. In case we have any questions on the way, we would be picking up. Yeah, don't build it now, Rahim. Hopefully I can address you as Rahim. So Rahim, just don't build it now. These videos would be available and the project would also be available. My project is a public project, so I'll be sharing the link so that you can pick up the code and the YAML file, everything together and execute the pipeline yourself. So just focus on my screen now and uh, maybe looking at the video. You can spend another 2.5 hours sometime and then build it yourself. Uh, if we parallelly try to do, sometimes we miss the small stuffs and that connections don't get set up. So hope you don't mind in that. So let me go ahead. I have a setup ready. I'll be doing a setup here just to show that uh, how do we bring up. So I'll go ahead and start with, I have a resource group. Everyone knows how to build up a CentOS server. That's the reason I've not kept that. I've kept that ready already. Still then, I'm not sure what's the background of the people joining in. So I'll just show how do I build up a virtual machine. So virtual machine, I can build up from here. This is my portal.azure.com. So we need to go to two web pages. One is portal.azure.com for my Azure account. And I need to go to dev.azure.com for logging into my Azure DevOps. So here I'm in portal.azure.com. This is my Azure cloud account. In that, I'm creating a virtual machine. This virtual machine is like a workstation for us. I am going ahead and creating a new resource group. We can say August 21 RG, for example. I'll give a name for it, say CentOS server. I'll go ahead and pick up my favorite region, East US. And I'm picking up an image of CentOS base 7.9. The machine size is 2 virtual CPU, 4 GB RAM. I don't want to spend time for the keys just for the demo purpose. Otherwise, if we are actually setting up a workstation, then we go ahead and use SSH keys. I'm just using username and password for now so that I can quickly SSH. I'm making sure that SSH port is open. And apart from that, I'm not making any changes. This will go ahead and set up a new VNet. And in that VNet, uh, there would be a subnet created in this range and my virtual machine would be launched. I'm not making any changes to it. So you people can set up a very similar system with a CentOS image. I'll go ahead and click on review and create. It's validating all the parameters which I've mentioned. If the validation passes, I can go ahead and hit on create. So my deployment is in progress. I'll leave this page as it is. Sure, Sumit. I'll ping my Twitter handle and my LinkedIn handle later on the chat, if that's okay. Or you want it right away, then you can post your questions here. I'm live here for 2 hours. And before quitting from the session, just remind me again, I'll certainly put my Twitter handle and my LinkedIn handle so that you people can get in touch with me in future. So I've triggered the deployment of a CentOS workstation. I'll go ahead and set up a SQL database as well. You can bring these things using commands too. You can use the commands and create the resources. I'm just showing up an easier way to do it. Most of the time, we normally use the commands, but here I'm trying to use the portal more. So I'm using the same resource group. You will wait for a while. Resource group creates pretty quick. So I'm using the same resource group and I'll give a database name like ClaimDB. And I would go ahead and set up a server. So I want to set up a new server for this. A server would be having the database. So I'll say ClaimDB server and I'll say some MJ at the end. Okay. And I'll give a username, sysadmin, and a password, which I would be able to remember. So this would be the server in which there would be a database named this would be created. I'll go ahead and click on OK and make sure I select that server name here in the dropdown because I had the other server as well. I'm not changing anything. It's 2 virtual core, 32 GB storage. I'm just living with that. Geo-redundant, local redundant copies just in the same AZs. Zone redundant across AZs, the copy would be stored, and geo-redundant across regions, we would be having the data backup. That's the reason I'm just living with the default one. Networking, you want to give a public endpoint, you can go ahead and give that. I'm not doing that. Security, I'm not changing anything. Additional settings, tags, review and create. I'm not changing anything over here. Just hit on create. SQL database server would be up. So our 2 components have come in. I'll just make a save of this picture so that if we want, we would address this, like open it later. So agenda, this would be the first one. Let me number it. Someone is on unmute. If you can be on mute in case you don't have a question, you can post your questions on the chat. So at present, we are bringing up a CentOS workstation. So a workstation would come up. Then we are bringing up a SQL, Azure SQL server. So a server with a database is coming up. These two things are there. Let me check who is on unmute.
Yeah, you can continue, Mamta. I am unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Fine. So now I'll create a Azure container registry as well. That would not take long time. I'm also writing ACR over there. You need to write container. The service name is container registry. I'll go ahead and create a container registry. And I would use the same resource group, which we have used right now. I think I created. Okay, fine. Just confirming if I had created in the correct account. Here you have to give a registry name. Registry name has to be unique. It will have a DNS name by itself. So I'll just say ACR, say demo. Hopefully this gives me a unique name. Yeah, it's unique. Availability zones, you can go ahead and enable if you want. I'm in a standard one and that you don't have that. If you go to premium, you get an option for it. I'm just living with standard one. I can get a public endpoint here for the premium one as well. So the container registry has 3 tiers, the basic, the standard, and the premium. Depends how the images which we store in the container registry, how that gets replicated. And with that, you decide your tier. I'm just going with the default tier at present. I would hit on review and create. Validation has passed. I'll go ahead and create it. So, so let me put that as well in the picture. So Azure Container Registry is a registry server in which we would create a repo, and this repo would be having our images. The registry gets created pretty quick. It is created. I'll go ahead and create a Kubernetes cluster as well. So Kubernetes service, you can hit create a Kubernetes cluster. Go ahead and pick up the same resource group. So resource group help us in logically segregating the resources, right? And if you want to put permissions, these all those things also can be done with the resource group. You can apply role-based access controls on the resource group. And while cleaning up as well, if I just go ahead and clean the resource group, that would like simplify our life instead of going and looking for resources here and there under all the services section. I'll be able to clean them in one go. That's the reason I'm using that. So I'll go ahead and name my cluster SK8 as demo. I'm living with the same region. Now, if we are bringing up multiple instances in our AKS cluster, they would spread across the zones. So I'm just using them so that I have high availability. The version of Kubernetes can be selected from here. At present, 1.22 came around 2 weeks back, but that would get tested and then only that would show up. So we run around one version behind in AKS most of the time because obviously Microsoft would test that Kubernetes open source software and then make it available for the entire Microsoft users. That's the reason one version later, like back, we would be running. I'm choosing the default one here. You can define the node pool sizes. So what exactly is a node pool? I'm creating a AKS cluster. AKS cluster can have different sizes of the nodes. So we segregate them under node pools. Like I have node pool 1. And for example, if I create node pool 2, Node pool will give us the specifications of count of nodes you would have under this pool. Like, say, for example, I'll say 2, and you will give size. Say, I want to have a 2 virtual CPU and a 4 GB RAM size machine, and 2 of them, then 2 of the nodes would get spin up. And then I go ahead and say that the count here would be, say, for example, 1, and the size would be, say, 4 virtual CPU, 8 GB RAM, or you want to take a GPU-based server, you're running machine learning models and all that, you can go ahead and do that. Just to emphasize, these are just worker nodes because AKS is nothing but managed Kubernetes. In managed Kubernetes, you don't give specifications for the master. So this is my worker node 1, this is my worker node 2, and this is my worker node 3. But they are segregated into 2 different node pools. And I can put scaling on this. I can scale each node pools individually. So if I want to increase number of nodes, I can configure auto scaling as well. If you want to manually scale, so scaling can be done in 2 ways. One would be manual or another would be auto. Depends on how you configure, you would be able to attain that. So I've noted down Muni Ratnam's question as well. I'll come to that in a while. Let me just explain this. So here you can see, this is my primary node pool. The first node pool is called as a primary node pool. That's the default pool which we have. And in that, if you want to change the size of the server, you can go ahead here and change it. Like I want to take 2 virtual CPU, 4 GB RAM, and click on select. You can say manual, then you would be allowed to give the number of nodes. If you say auto scaling is recommended here, then I start with 2, and on demand, if there is a lot of workload running and I don't have sufficient resources on those 2 servers, then I would scale to 4 of them automatically. So this is my cluster level auto scaling. This is not my application auto scaling. So 2 types of auto scaling would come into picture. One would be the cluster auto scaling, in which you are scaling the infrastructure, and one would be the scaling of your application, which would be running inside the containers. So this is cluster level scaling. I'm just living with auto scaling for this particular node pool. You can go ahead and create more node pools in the second tab. You can add here one more node pool. Like, for example, I'll give pool 2, and you can specify what type of operating systems you want to select, whether you want to distribute these in the availability zones, and you can specify a size over here. Like I want to give B2MS, 2 virtual CPU and 8 GB RAM. I want to live with manual, and I want to give just 1 node here. You can even specify how many pods you can spin up in these nodes in the cluster. So max to max, you can go up to 250 pods on a node in Azure. So here we are limiting to 110. That's the default value which is coming. I'll just live with that. So I exactly have like this. There are 3 worker nodes now, 2 in one pool and 1 in the second pool. But my first node pool name is called as agent pool. If I want to rename that, I can call it as pool 1 as well. So 2 pools are there with 2 node count and 1 node count. This is the size and this is the size. Authentication, when my AKS cluster interacts with other Azure resources, like could be a load balancer, could be a Azure Container Registry, could be a Azure SQL Server. How do you want to authenticate that? You can use service principal or you can use managed identity. Managed identity I'm living with. So this is authentication across Azure resources. But the next option which is there, that is resources, which is authentication within resources within the cluster, like a pod uh, to be spin up. by Mamta as a user, or for example, Aryan is a user in my cluster, what access control he would be having. If I want to control that, I'll have to enable role-based access control. So I can create roles on the cluster level. I can say there is a developer group in which Rashmita, Vivek, Mahesh are belonging, and there is an administrator named Asif. So Asif would be able to do anything in my cluster, but Rashmita, Vivek, and say Mahesh would be able to do only the actions which I grant them. So if you want to enable that, you can go ahead and enable it, or you just disable that as well. I can also integrate Azure Active Directory with it. We have a few other sessions planned just dedicated with AKS. Rashmita was saying, like, you can check the other related events which are coming with Microsoft Reactor, right? So we would be having another session which would help us integrating with Active Directory and few other services. So I'm not touching that now. The node pools which are there, they need to have encryption for the operating system disk. So I'm just living with the default encryption. Networking, I can go ahead and select KubeNet or Azure CNI. If I select KubeNet, that is the default plugin which is there. It creates a VNet for the cluster using some default values. And if I say Azure CNI, here I can even go ahead and select the network which got created for my CentOS workstation as well. Or I want to entirely create a new network, I can go ahead and do that as well. So here a VNet with my specifications, a subnet with my specifications would be created. I can specify the address range in which my Kubernetes services would be getting the IP addresses, the Docker containers would be getting the IP addresses from the bridge. That also can be specified over here. So I'm just living with the default values, but yes, I'm creating a VNet specifically for this. Now, whenever we are creating an AKS cluster, automatically it integrates with a standard load balancer. We know that there are varied varieties of load balancers, right? Basic is there, standard is there. Then we have the application gateway and all. So here, standard load balancer is integrated by default. You don't have an option to integrate it. It is by default enabled. And if you want to enable application gateway, you can click here. Sorry. Security wise, I want to enable a private cluster. My cluster would be just private. Other resources would be able to access. I would not be able to access from outside. Or I want to set some authorized IP addresses from where I can access this. I can even do that. Or I want to set up network policies as well. We can do that. Network policies helps us in implementing security for pod-to-pod communication when containers are communicating with each other. That time we can, if we want to implement policies to do that, we can select. So if you want to do that, you can go ahead and select this. At present, I'm just living with none. Here itself, you can integrate. If Azure Container Registry is already present, you would be able to get that and integrate that with your AKS cluster. In case you have not done this, a small command AKS update with a hyphen attach hyphen ACR, if you run, you would be able to attach your AKS with ACR. Why we need this, I'll tell you when we are actually deploying our application. Monitoring can be enabled. This will integrate it with Azure Monitor. A new log analytics workspace would be created where our Azure Kubernetes cluster and application logs, everything would be pushed up over there. If you want to enable Azure policies for safeguarding or securing your cluster, you can go ahead and enable this as well. Tag, you can put like environment dev type of thing. Review and create and go ahead and spin up your cluster once the validation has passed. I saw a couple of questions coming in the chat some time back. Let me just see. 110 is the max that you tried. The 250. You tried the 250 tough. I have lived with 110. I've not given 250 pods. Max to max, you can go to 250 there, but the recommended is 110, Ranga. So I'm just living with the default one. I'm not changing that. So these limitations are there. Few limitations comes from the Kubernetes world. Few limitations comes from the Azure world as well, right? Let me see if we have uh, choosing CentOS instead of Windows. Any reason? No specific reason as such, Anil. I have chosen CentOS because um, I majorly work on Linux environment. I don't work that much on Windows environment. I'm more into Red Hat and all that stuff. And that's the reason. That's my comfort. That's the reason I've chosen. No specific reason for that. There was another question from Muniratnam. What is the scenario we need to choose Docker and AKC? I think you meant AKS. We would understand why we need Docker and AKS both. If I have to define that, I would say Docker would create containers and Kubernetes manages those containers. Kubernetes doesn't have intelligence in creating containers. So when we have to do a build of image, you would be needing Docker software. Once the image is built, when you deploy it, you would be needing Kubernetes because if I just deploy a standalone container, high availability of the application would not be there. And I can't just live with running one instance of a container, right? That's the reason we would be deploying that container using the Docker image, which we have produced with the help of Docker into our Kubernetes cluster. Hope your question is answered. Node auto scaling is done on what basis? Configuration of the default parameters are there. They have not given us, Shruti, the parameters which we can configure. We can just specify that we need auto scaling. And obviously on the CPU, memory, disk, and all that, Azure at the backend, because remember, it's a managed service, right? So we don't have to use our brain that much in the managed services. So default parameters are there. They have not specified that in the documentation anywhere, like on what percent of CPU they would be spinning it up. But yes, CPU, memory, disk, network IO, these would be few of the parameters which they would be assessing before scaling up. Changing the type of the load balancer. Standard is the one which is there. If you enable that HTTP checkbox, which I showed, we can also integrate application gateway, which will help us in uh, analyzing or integrating with the advanced ingress controller type of load balancer. Yeah, Vivek said that we can even use SCADA for event-based scaling. And we can use virtual nodes as well. Virtual nodes would come into picture when our nodes are completely filled and we want to automate or automatically scale. Virtual means the servers are not ours. It would scale up, containers would run, but it would not be on the infra which we have. It would not be our worker nodes. So we can go ahead and automate that as well. There was an option of virtual node. If we enable that, it would be like a Azure container instances would be running and it would scale up. But yes, those parameters would remain the same. So AKS cluster is also coming up. So we have stitched up these things and we have also done one thing. We have connected our AKS with our, I'll just put the arrow mark here, ACR. We have done an attachment here. So attachment means my AKS gets permission to pull image from ACR. So I would be able to pull the image from ACR to deploy it over here. Okay, so these are the resources. Let me go ahead and see. Hopefully all the resources have come up. This was the resource group, Azure Container Registry, your CentOS server, and other stuffs have come up. I'll just log into my CentOS server. I'll pick up the public IP address over here. I'll go ahead and SSH to my CentOS server. Hopefully I've given this as the login ID. Fresh system, so I'll go ahead and do yum update. It will take a while. Let me open up the page from where I can pick up my commands because there are quite a few number of it. I'll go ahead and install Git after this. This is going to take, in the latest CentOS version, they are taking along for the update. So I'll just skip from here. Meantime, I'll go ahead and make few other things ready till the time this update and all is going on. Let's log into our dev.azure.com. And I'll go ahead and create a new project. Say claimapp.net. I'll give it a private visibility. I'll hit on create. So in Azure DevOps, so this entire page which I have, let me just hopefully the font is visible. In case not, just let me know. I'll just increase that. Okay, let me take some other color. This would be my Azure DevOps. In Azure DevOps, they have changed quite a few number of stuffs from, I think, from June, July timeframe last year. So I have an organization already set up. Under organization, you have billing. In billing, you will go and select your subscription. And in this subscription, we will set up agents configuration, Microsoft hosted agents or self-hosted agents. You can give parallel processing parameters here. How many parallel jobs you want? For now, we can make it 1-1 in case you're planning to do it on a self-hosted agent as well. You can go ahead and make it 1, and here you can make it 1. Then you will create a project, which I have done. So these agents would be configured for private project. So my project visibility is private. And then in this project, I will go ahead and create my repos. Let's go ahead and do this. So my repository is here. Let me pick up my repo link. So if you click on the repo section, you have an option of importing it. So click on import. If your code is residing in Azure repos, Bitbucket, and all that, you can go ahead and select Git, or if it is in TFVC, then you can select TFVC. If it requires authentication, you can give it over here. At present, mine is a public one, so it should be able to import without any issues. I'm putting that on the chat so that if you people want to import my project, you can go ahead and do that. Yeah, Rahul, I'll do that. just made a note of it. I'll surely share the uh, history command output, and I'll put it in a place from where you people can pick it up. So my project has come in, and here pipeline and all those things are already there, but I'll not be picking up that. I'll be setting up a pipeline from scratch. Docker file and deployment file are there, which is pre-written and kept it. The .NET code is also residing. So this is my entire uh, repository, which is there. Let me go ahead and see if update is done. The update is done. So I'll go back to the page where I'll go ahead and install Git. So in Ubuntu and all, you get Git by default, but here in CentOS, you don't have Git. So I'm installing Git. After installing Git, I can go ahead and clone my repository here. I would go ahead and clone the repository.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
I have a question. Did you logged in into the node on the Kubernetes cluster?
No,
And
this
you
is
are
my CentOS workstation. This is my CentOS workstation. You can see here it says CentOS server. You
okay,
would
but
not.
this is not the Kubernetes node.
No, this is not a Kubernetes node. And why do you think I should log into a Kubernetes node? I will
Yeah,
not log into my Kubernetes node because I would be interacting. How do I explain? Let me just see if I can explain it over here. So I would have a CentOS server here. My AKS cluster is residing here, in which I have 3 worker nodes, and there are master nodes somewhere managed by Azure. This is managed by Azure. So when you work in deploying applications here as a container, you don't interact with the worker nodes ever. You interact with the master. There is a API server residing here, which would receive the API calls. And from here, sitting on the CentOS machine, I would be executing the kubectl commands, or I would be executing the commands from the pipelines. And that would take us to your Azure API server, which is running with the cloud provider on the master node. And this guy takes the responsibility of interacting and spinning up the containers here. So we never interact with the worker nodes as such. That's the reason there is no option that I'll be going into the worker node. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't get your name.
Sumit.
Yeah, Sumit. So hope
Okay,
that's
actually, I
clear.
got confused. I got confused because you used the CentOS in the nodes as well, and I think you created this worker machine on the Azure environment as well. So I got confused.
No. Good that you asked. So guys, if
Thanks.
we have any questions, please ask. Don't hesitate. Uh, so I have logged into my CentOS workstation. This is the Bastion host, which I've drawn over here. So at present, I have done SSH here, and I've installed Git over here. So I want to build and do all those things in my present laptop. So whenever you are having a server and you want to build and deploy something, will you not do it manually once? We would first verify our application is working as expected, and then go ahead and deploy the things and all that, right? And that's the reason I'm picking up that server. I'll do a build manually, check everything is running, and then go ahead and uh, work with uh, deploying it in an automated fashion. And that's the reason I've installed Git. We would go ahead and do a Git clone. I can do a Git clone from here itself. Yeah.
Mamta, just to interrupt and clarify, I think this CentOS workstation server is a kind of a temporary measure, right? We essentially would like to do an automated CI/CD pipeline and interact with the master AKs directly from our Azure DevOps.
Yes, but will a developer not have a workstation where that person will sit and code?
Yes, and I think we could also connect to the master node remotely from our workstation if we want to, or how do you see?
No, in EKS, you can't connect to the master anytime. You can't. AKS, a managed cluster, right? You would not be able to connect to the master. Master is not physical to the top. That's the reason it's a managed service. If you can connect to the master, it is not a managed service, right?
Yeah, but then the reason for this CentOS virtual machine that we have created is to interact with the kubectl
करना
cluster.
2 मिनिट थांबा जरा
Guys, those who
2
are
मिनिट
not
थांब
asking the
फक्त
question, if you can be on mute, apart from one person. Who asked this question? Can you just name yourself, please? It would be
Sure,
good
this
if
is
you could name yourself and then ask the question. So can I address you by the name?
okay. So my name is Nilanjan.
Yeah,
Uh,
Nilan.
I would repeat the question, I think,
Yeah.
if in case. So my understanding was that the CentOS VM that we have created in Azure is to interact with the AKS.
Yes. So I would be interacting from here to my AKS cluster, no doubt. I would do that
Yeah.
because before automating, I would like to deploy it once manually. Then I can go ahead and do this. If we don't want to do this, it's just like a pure workstation, in which a developer is sitting and building the code. That's the intention of
Exactly.
this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
So my follow-up question was that I understand that from Azure DevOps, the eventuality is that from our Azure DevOps pipeline, we would essentially make this automated and we will interact with the kubectl on the AKS. As an alternative to it, instead of going to the Azure VM of CentOS, can we use our local uh,
Laptop.
workstations? Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. So whatever you are configuring here, right?
Yeah.
I have that in my laptop as well, all AZ CLI and all. Normally,
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
spin up that. It's just that you need Azure command line interface. You
Exactly.
need
Yeah.
kubectl.
Mm.
You need Git here.
Yeah.
And like normally, I do it in Visual Studio Code. So I have VS Code in here.
True.
Sit and develop your code here and directly connect that with your Azure repos as well from Visual
True.
Studio Code and
True.
push your code and automatically do all those things here.
Yeah.
In my laptop, .NET was giving a problem.
Okay.
That's the reason I spinned up this because you know, right?
Yeah.
Mac and
Understand.
Microsoft don't go
Don't go
that
hand in hand.
with each other. So
True.
today morning when I was trying to set up this entire environment, the latest version of .NET was giving a trouble. So I thought
Okay.
I'll have a CentOS machine for the safer side.
Okay.
And I'm more into Linux, and that's the reason
I
CentOS
understand.
and not a Windows server.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes
Otherwise,
sense.
everything can
Yeah.
be done on the laptop.
True. Yeah. That's what my let's say confusion or a bit of question was, because I'm used to this workflow of having things in my laptop and with the Azure CLI connect to the AKS
Correct.
instead of going via the VM. So yeah, thanks for the
Yeah,
clarification.
you can certainly do that. So I have cloned the entire Git repository here, and the code is present over here. So here we have written a Docker file. This I would not say this is a very good Docker file. Why? Because uh, we could have written more compressed or say more fine-grained Docker file as well. Still then, I have tried to keep 2 stages Docker file here so that the image which gets produced is not having all the things which are needed in the building stage. So this is the first stage of my Docker file. How many stages do you have in a Docker file? How do you identify the number of RUMs which we have in the Docker file? That defines how many stages which we are having in our Docker file and why we would have multiple stages. We would have multiple stages so that in one stage, I can build my .NET code. And in the second stage, I would build my Docker image. So I would build my .NET code, produce an executable. Here you're seeing that I'm producing an executable with -o out. And this I would be using directly. For producing that executable as the output, I need a lot of binaries and libraries of .NET, which is actually not needed during the running phase. So to shred that and have a very thin layer of your image, which we actually deploy, that's the reason we create this multi-stage for Java, for .NET, those type of applications where we have the option of creating an executable, there we can utilize this. But in PHP type of application, we will not be able to do this because there you just copy the code and your application runs, right? You don't go ahead and compile and build your code over there. So here, coming to this, I'm starting with this specific image. You can see this is the image with which you are starting. And this is the name of the stage. Build-env is the name of the stage. Work directory, I'm setting work directory set to /apps. That means as soon as you start your container, you would be landing into /app inside the container. You would be getting inside /app inside the container. Now, here you're copying all csproj files into your dot. This dot means you would be copying that into work directory. So when we have this Docker file, when we have this Docker file, this statement means, before to that, I'll say this Docker file is named as Docker file over here. And when you want to produce an image out of it, you would be executing a command called as docker build. And if your file is not named as Docker file, it is not present in this directory and all, you can give the things with -f and you will set the context with dot. So what happens at the back end? There is a Docker daemon process which is running, which is called as Docker daemon. This command is being taken up by the Docker daemon. And this guy would be creating a temporary container with this image would be spinned up. So normally when we manually create an image, what we do, we first create a container, put our applications inside that, whatever we are needing, set environment variables, everything we do, and then we take a snapshot of it with a Docker commit. Exactly, Docker daemon is also going to do that. It's just that I am not doing it. Docker daemon would be doing it on our behalf, and that's the reason it is called as automation over here. So here, this container has come up with this image. And inside that, think that you have done cd to /app. And you have set that default directory. How you set a default directory for a specific user? Whenever I log into home Mamta, that sort of thing. You think that in that container, whenever I get in, I'll get into /app. So this is my directory change has happened already. Now, when I go ahead and execute a copy command, copy would have source and the destination. So this is my source and dot is my destination. In Linux, we know dot is the present working directory. So files which are present in my repository, I'm copying everything inside the container in this folder. So the entire code base is getting copied inside this temporary container. So code is coming here. Then we are executing the command of .NET restore. That command will get executed over here. After that, you go ahead and say copy dot to this place. So copy dot to dot means from source to the destination. Source is present working directory on the host machine. This Docker file is written on my CentOS server. Okay, so this CentOS server is having this code base. The cloned directory which we had, that is my present working directory. And my destination is this container. The entire, whatever is present on that home directory, that would get copied over here. And after that, you're doing the build, you're building and publishing the output. So this temporary container would have this .NET build executed and one out would be produced. So this container will be done with it. So once this is done, there is another container which will spin up. So Docker daemon will spin up one more container at the back end, which we would not realize, and that would come up with this base operating system image. I'm bringing up .NET, ASP.NET 3.1. Here you can see I had included the software development kit. So a lot of other packages were there, which helped me in building. But here they wouldn't be shrinked. And again, I'm setting up my directory as /app. And this statement is important, copy. Hopefully we can see the font size. So this statement is important. Copy from where? Copy from build environment. Build environment is what? This guy, the first container. So the .out which was produced here, I am copying that from here to here. So what was present in app out, that is getting copied in my present working directory. And the entire build output is copied over here. Now, entry point specifies what would be the process that would start once my container starts. So I'm giving that DLL that this would be starting once this container starts from the image. So I just remember this entry point. Entry point will not get executed now. It's just like memorizing what would get created once the container is spin up. So this is just like a thing which is kept in the brain inside the container. And Docker daemon takes a snapshot of this with a Docker commit and produces the image for you. You get this image. And this is the image which is actually we will be using for deploy. So let's go ahead, see that. How do we do it? So we would need few other servers, software installed in it. Like I would have to install .NET in case I want to manually build .NET and all that stuff. So I have another server already ready. I'll just pick up the IP address of that. Just give me a minute. So I logged in over here. Hope everyone is doing good. Can I have a quick message on the chat in case people are good? Why both the container is kept for image? These are temporary containers. They would not be kept. It's just a background container. And it's the second container which would be committed and we would be creating an image out of it. So it's not that there are two containers. Rahul, if I didn't understand your question, if you want to elaborate on that, you can go ahead and do. In Docker image, we are building temporary containers. It's not Docker image, we are building temporary containers. To build that Docker image, Docker daemon is actually building a temporary container. Okay, so normally we pick up a container, we put all our software manually and we commit and create an image. Instead of that, you will write a Docker file. Docker file helps us in automating the process of creating a container image. So I would be handing over the script, this script which is there, that I'm handing over to Docker daemon and I'm saying that pick the script and build an image and give it to me. So these two containers which are there, they are in the background. They would not be visible to us. When we do a Docker build, we will just see Docker build output. Okay, but at the back end, there are actually two containers which are running and Docker daemon is also taking a snapshot and executing a Docker commit command and giving us the image as the output. So one question from Rahul, that how it understands which one to keep to create an image. So see, Rahul, image would be created by both. Okay. Image is not created by just one. Do you think output image of this is not there? Then that is wrong. Image is created by this also, and image is created by this also. It's just that we will pick up this image and we are not picking up this image. If I have 5-stage Docker file, 5 images would be created. It's my wish which image I want to pick up. You want to pick up image 1 also and deploy a container out of it, you would be able to do that. It's not that you would not be able to do it, okay? So both the containers are there and both containers image would be created. Now going ahead, we would be pushing that to ACR. We have not done that yet. So we would be pushing that image to ACR for sure. Are you building the image in your dev machine here in CentOS VM? Yes, I'm building the image in my CentOS virtual machine. So I'll go here. You can see the Docker file is over here. I can go ahead and do a Docker build and I can give a dot. This is what it is doing. It was building the context. I'll just increase the font size in case there is some trouble. Okay, and this would go ahead and build that entire Docker file and produce the image. So this I'm doing in my CentOS workstation. You can see this. In this workstation, I went ahead without showing you people. I have installed Azure CLI. I've installed kubectl, the applications which I had listed. If I sit and do that, we would not be able to finish all the things in 2.5, 3 hours, right? That's the reason I've gone ahead and installed Azure CLI, kubectl CLI, .NET, everything I've done. And now you can see it has started to build the first stage. It would go ahead and execute things step by step. And after some time, you would see that it is going ahead and building the second stage as well. So this is the image output from the first stage. And from here, it has started to build the second stage. And this is the output from the second stage. Let me do Docker images and let's see. CA21, this guy, correct? And 04A, this is the first image. This is the first image. And this is the second image, which is there. First image and the second image, which is there. So you can see I've built this yesterday because a demo doesn't work, then it feels really very bad. You get very depressed and people also don't enjoy. So just confirming things would work today. I had built that image yesterday. If I just go ahead and delete these images, it would freshly create the entire image. So I'll do one thing. I'll just go ahead and remove this tagging. I'll just remove this Docker image. Command to remove Docker image is Docker RMI, Docker remove image. I'm just going ahead and doing that so that I show you how the tagging happens. So this is the image which is produced at present. And I want to push it in a Azure Container Registry. Then I'll have to name it like that. So if you go to your Azure Container Registry, the Azure Container Registry's name has to be picked up. I'll log in to one of my accounts where the demo is kept ready. So ACR demo MJ, if you see here, we have to pick up this name. So now, whenever we say Docker push, at that point in time, the image would be pushed to your Docker container registry, but it needs to authenticate with it. That would be one thing. So you would first do a Docker login and you would go ahead and supply your credentials. AZ, ACR, login you do and supply your credentials so that you would be able to push manually. We would be doing this from the pipeline, so I'm not doing that here. But in case you want to push manually, you can go ahead and push manually from this workstation as well. So I'm just seeing whether my image build is happening fine or not. Image has built properly. If I want to deploy a container using that image and see if container comes up. So as a developer, what we do, I'll write my .NET code. I'll write my Docker file. I will build my Docker file, produce an image out of it, and then deploy a container and see if the container is coming up or not. If that container is coming up, well, that means I'm rest assured my application is containerized properly. And then I go and look for automation, right? Unless and until I am very sure my container would come up, doing the automation part will not make any sense. So we will try and do a Docker deployment here just to see that the container which I have produced is working properly or not. So I'll go ahead and execute the Docker run command. So name of the container is test claims API. One more important thing, whichever port number I give here, I'll just dissect this command and I'll tell you what exactly I'm doing. This is the name of the image with which I would bring up my container. The one which got produced at present, that image I'm picking up. I'm naming the container as test claims API. And I want to interactively get inside the container, then I'll give -it. In case you don't want to interactively get inside the container's terminal, then you can give -dt as well, your choice. Whenever we are logging into the web page, that time we would be seeing up the traces coming in. So let me go as -it. Docker run command would see if image is present, go and create and start the container. All three things. It has the capability of doing all the three things. Now the -p option, which is there, that is important parameter here. Let me see if I can clear these stuffs. Just give me a minute. Some patience expected from your end. Writing is pretty easy. Cleaning up is a tough job. Yeah. Okay. So this is my CentOS machine. It has an Ethernet interface 0 on which we have the public IP address to which you have SSH. So SSH is running as a process on the port number 22 to which you have connected. In this, there is a bridge network there because Docker is already running. This is a Linux bridge called as Docker 0. In that, we would get one container. We would get one container. And this container would come up with the image which we have spin up now, right now. Okay, that we would be bringing up. And this application, the web app expects packet on port number 80 as per the code. So application is running here. Application is listening on port number 80. but this container would get a private IP address from this subnet range. Bridge will have a subnet range of 172.17.0.0/16, and this guy will get an IP address over here, like 172.17.0.2. First one is reserved for the gateway, and it gets that IP address. Now, this IP is not resolvable from outside. So when you want your containers to communicate with the outside world, you tag that with a port number on the host. That -p instruction does that. If you say 5000:80, this is container port, and this is the host or the virtual machine port. When you specify this on the operating system level, a IP table rule gets created. What is the rule? It says whenever packet is coming on the VM IP address on port number 5001, forward that to the bridge, and bridge understands which container is tagged to this port number. So bridge will forward that to the container IP address on port number 80. And that is how you reach. This is port number 5001. Hopefully we understand this. Sumit, pipeline has yet not come into picture, so I'll get that pipeline. At present, we are trying to set up the container manually just to verify if things are working fine or not. And let's deploy this container and see if it is up and running. So if you execute this command, container with this name is already up and running on port number 5001. So I'll just say, so you can see on port number 5001, my container is up and it has logged in into it. You can see over here, the two containers can't have same name. Just to test it out, I already had a container running, and that's the reason here it gave me an error. The container name is already in use. Containers ID, containers name have to be unique in that system. So let's pick up, let me just verify if the port numbers are open. So this is my CentOS workstation. I'll go to the networking section and verify if I have the outbound rules. In this server, actually, I've opened all the port numbers. You can see there is a rule which is specified, any source, any destination, accept, allow the packet. In case I want to be very specific, I can make this as 5001. That's the only difference, because I keep using this machine for deploying different applications on different port number. That's the reason I've just kept all the ports open. But from the security perspective, it's not correct. You need to just open the specific port number. Okay. Let me see if we have any questions. Can we have two containers on the same port number? No, Jaya Prakash, right? You tell me what would be the answer of this. If two different packets, like this is my claim application, and there is another container running, which is running Uber. Didn't book a cab from long back, so Uber came in mind. So this guy is also listening on 80. Can this guy listen on 80 port number? My container too. Can it listen on port number 80, guys? Question for you people. Put a message on the chat. Can two containers on the container port, can they listen on 80? Answer is wrong. Babu, just think. What is first container's IP address? It is 172.17.0.2. This guy is listening on 80. Container C2 is 172.17.0.3. This is also 80. Can't I have two applications running like this? On the container level, I asked. We can listen on same port number inside the container. Can't I have 100 web apps listening on port number 80 in their respective containers? We can. But all of them can't connect to 5,000. That was Jayaprakash's question. Like, can I connect to port number 5001 on second container as well? Now this rule is written, if packet is coming on 5001, I'm saying forward it to container 1. If I write two containers opening same port number, this rule can't be overwritten, right? So if I try to create another container on the same port number as 5000, it will say that 5000 port number is already in use. Two containers can't connect to the same port number on the host machine. This can't be valid. This can't be valid at all. So if you want to have a different port number tagging for your Uber application, yes. You reach here, I'll take you to Uber. Sorry, I wrote the same number. Let me write 5002. You reach here, I'll take you to the Mediclaim. We didn't say on the bridge the port number is 5000. This is the bridge. On the host machine, I took 5001. This is my host port. My host IP address has that complete port number. That host port we are talking about. Okay. And from there, you will fall to the bridge. Because why? This container is having a private IP address. You can't reach to this private address from outside. So you reach the public IP address. And from there, you can say port forwarding, port mapping, NATing, whatever you want to give the name as. From there, it gets translated, it falls to the bridge and then goes to the container. Or container level, your port is this. On host level, your port is this. Two different applications can't listen on the same port number on the host. Because one application is already listening. It can be a container, it can be any other application, right? If that port number is used, that port number is used. You can't use that port number. So let me just show you. I'll press Control C here and just shut down this container. This application is down. One container is already listening on port number 5000 for me. I would go ahead and list Docker PS command. This would list me the containers. You can see here, port number 5000 is already utilized by this guy. The container name is test claim apps, and it is up and running for the last 18 hours. So if I try to create the second container as well, which I'm trying to test now, name has to be different. So I'll make it 2. See what is the error. It says port number 5000 is already used. It's already allocated. Ashish, I'll give the name of the app later. It's called as Tayasui Sketches. It's a weird name. And the board which I use is a XP pen hardware is there. With that we write. And that's the reason it's like you can write it as if you're writing on a board. So here 5000 can't be utilized. So I'll go ahead and use 5001. Container is up. So my applications at present actually is running in 2 places. Okay. So let's pick up the virtual machine's IP address. $5,000. You should be able to see the application page. This is the claim one. So I don't have a beautiful web page like GUI and all that in it. It's a simple application. So 5001 and 5000 both are serving. You can see here, this is 5001 and this is 5000. So Nilanjal has a question. If we have two containers, then how do we bring up? In case we have a multiple container, then we can use Docker Compose, certainly, correct. You really have to think if both the containers are needing external connectivity. Like, for example, instead of having this application as Uber, if I say this is my web application and the container C2 is my database, then this connectivity is not needed. It's not that it would not listen on a port. I just deleted that. So instead of, let me delete this. If, for example, my database was also running in the container itself, I would have bought two containers. I should have created two images, bought two containers, and one would be listening on 80 and this guy would be listening on the database port number. Say, call it as Redis instead of DB, otherwise people will get confused. Okay, this is my Redis. I'm listening on 6379 on the container. This guy doesn't need external connectivity. No one will connect to Redis from outside, so I would not grab a port number on the host. My application is reachable from here. This guy will go and talk to container C2 on 6379. So in multi-container setup, see guys, when you think you need external connectivity, then only you have to publish the port. If you don't need external connectivity, you don't publish the port. You don't publish the port. For container C2, no external connectivity is needed. You will not publish the port. For container C1, external connectivity is needed. That's the reason we are publishing the port. And same fundas would be carry forwarded to Kubernetes as well. You will have the same logic in Kubernetes as well. That's the reason I'm emphasizing and I picked up that question. So the only difference with Docker Compose is this bridge which is there, that also would be built by Docker Compose if I wish. If I wish. If I don't want to wish to create a fresh bridge, I can still live with the previous bridge and deploy my containers as a stack to that. So just to highlight few things, Docker Compose is a tool which helps us in how we use Docker in a dev environment for setting up a container and validating if my container is working fine, not working fine and all, right? Docker Compose is a tool on the developer level. You can use it to bring a multi-container application. So I don't have to do Docker run, and then say these two containers would be talking. That would not be there. Rather, I would say Docker Compose up, it would bring up the entire stack in one go. We can define dependencies. Container C2 should be there so that container C1 can come up. Those things can be defined in our Docker Compose. So just cleaning up these things. Okay, for after one point, this guy saves it. So it's not allowing me to clean up. So I'll just delete this. There is no option of selecting and cutting. Otherwise, I would have loved that feature. Okay, so our container is up. Things are looking fine. Containerization of the application is done. We have seen the Docker file. Now to deploy that in a Kubernetes cluster, what we need a YAML file or we need a Helm template. Helm template is also there in that repository, but I've not tested that, so I'll not pick up that. I'm not sure. Long back, I had deployed this application. So could be that the Helm template doesn't work today. So to be on the safer side, I will pick up the Kubernetes YAML file. So repository is having what? Repository is having my .NET code. Repo is having my Docker file. And repo is having a deployment file as well. Yeah, true, Sumit. I need to check the settings where I have to go and increase the size of this eraser. I'll do that. I think that many a times, but not done that yet. So deployment YAML file is something I'll be having. Let's go and see that deployment YAML file. That guy also should be present over here. You can see here, whenever the claim, you try to get all claims, it showed up from which IP address you're trying to get all claims and all that. No one asked me one question. This container should be connected to the MySQL backend. Then only the application will serve. Otherwise, the application will not serve. So that setting is there in our application settings. There is an app setting JSON file wherein I have written this. This is the connection string which I have picked up from my SQL server. So let me go to my SQL server here. I have done few things in the SQL server. Some settings are done. I'll just show you that. SQL database and server, both the things I'll just show you. When I have set up this, okay, firewall spelling, I have enabled this to interact with Azure services. And I have also tried adding up the VNet of my AKS cluster. You can add a virtual network like this, from which you expect the communication to happen, that you can do. And you can even add like the CentOS server's IP address I have given so that it allows me to communicate with my, this is like a more broader way of opening the stuff. This is more granular way of opening the stuff, so specific IP address, a specific VNet from where you're expecting packets to come. That is more better than opening for all the Azure services, right? So I've added my CentOS server's IP address, and I've told that this is the client from which you can expect the packet to come, or this is the VNet, because my container, which would be running in an AKS cluster, that also would communicate with my Azure SQL going ahead. So that time, this would be needed. That's the reason I've added this. This I've done on the SQL server level. Now let me take you to the SQL database. In SQL database, in the settings section, there is something called as connection string .NET. I'm selecting this. In this, the username and the password is not correctly mentioned. So what we will do, we will go ahead and where is my terminal? Yeah. So I have come here and I've updated my password. This was my password. And I've given that connection string over here. So SQL Server database. And that is the reason my container is able to communicate to the database backend. I can save this as an environment variable as well in my container and supply that as an env. And on the runtime, if my database name is changing or my users, the database administrators, user ID passwords are changing, we can even have that in a, what to say, it's not a static, in a dynamic way, I would be able to supply those parameters as well. I'm seeing a lot of messages with respect to the drawing tool. What happened, guys? Focus on Kubernetes and Docker rather than the drawing tool. I know it's good. MS Paint doesn't work, Santosh. Mac Paint troubles a lot. Microsoft and Apple are not friends, right? That's the reason. What to do? So here I've picked up this and I've given in the app setting.json file. Okay. So this is the one which we have given. And this is important. Otherwise, our container would not be able to connect to the database backend. So manual testing is done. Everything is looking good. Let's go ahead and build our pipeline, which our intention is. Any questions till now? If we have any other questions? Okay, please explain a little bit more about it. This command you mean, or what is it exactly, Jayaprakash? The command which I've given, this command you mean to say?
Mamta, he has posted a screenshot.
Could you please explain this error? Okay, let me just open up the screenshot once again. Okay, there were two errors which came when I started the container with name test claims API. That time I got an error saying that there is a conflict in the container name. This container is already in use. So two containers in the system can't have same container name. That's the reason that error came. So immediately what I did, I gave a different name to the container and container came up. Container name and ID both have to be unique. That's the reason it crypt. Because if you see Docker PS command output, there was a container already running with that name test claims API. This is running from yesterday, right? From 18 hours it is running. That's the reason this container didn't come up. Now this container was created by me, but just to show that how you come out of that container, I pressed Control-C and I came out. So this container got stopped. One container was existing with name test claim API. It was listening on port number 5000 already. So when I started this container, API2 container, on port number 5000, it gave me an error saying that two containers can't listen on the same port number. So the system was in this state. There was a bridge connected to the Ethernet interface 0. Container API was running, which was tagged on port number 5000 already. When you tried bringing up another container named API2 and you told I want to use the same port, it gave you an error. It said that I can't create this. You go ahead and remove the container, which is already listening on port number 5000 in case you want to create. And that's the reason this container never started. If you go ahead and do Docker PS-A, you would find out that two containers, they got started. No, here it is not present. They are not there at all. The API2 is not there at all. You can see over here. Okay. You can't see this API2 because that never got created. Now, I'll go ahead and create the container on port number 5000. It will give me the same error because one container is listening on port number 5000, and that is that error. Port is already in use. We understood, right? Host port, two containers can't share. This is a separate process. This is a separate process. It's just that it is a containerized process. Two processes can't listen on the same port number, and that's the reason you're getting that error. Hope that answers your question. Now let me go to the YAML file. YAML file helps us in actually deploying the application. So we would be deploying the application with the help of Kubernetes features. Kubernetes has a feature called as deployment. It's a type of controller which helps us in maintaining high availability of the application. If you want more replicas, so containers have a basic drawback. Docker doesn't understand replicas. So high availability, scalability, those things can't be handled by Docker. That's the reason we need Kubernetes, because one container is running, you can't guarantee that container would be ever running because containers are not stable as virtual machines because of the thin operating system which they have. So we never run one instance of a container. You can run multiple instances of a container. Like you can go ahead and say 2 containers I want to run. So this would be bringing up container with a deployment type of controller. This is the name and the label of the resource which I'm creating. In Kubernetes, every resource will have a name and a label associated to it. So my deployment is having a name called as Claim API, and it is having a label as Claim API. Then deployment needs to sit and watch both the containers which are running. That's the reason we have to tell the deployment that, hey, deployment, these are the containers which you will sit and monitor. And for that, you are giving this selector. This matches the label of the pod. You can see here, there are 2 labels I've given. They are the labels of the pod. So template specifies the pods and the containers definition. So I'm saying this is the pod's label. It will have one container named Claim API. It will come up with this image, and it would be listening on this container's port number. If you want to change your image, say the name, you can go ahead and change that. I'm just living with that same image name for now because I've not tagged that with the ACR name. We will see how we tag that with the ACR name and we deploy that using our pipeline. I've pushed the same image of mine in my hub.docker.com that I'm using it over here. So this will bring up my containers, 2 pods with a controller behind it. And this is going to expose that. So in Kubernetes, we have different types of services. We need service because pods don't have a static IP address. This is my pod P1, which would have the container 1. And this is pod P2, which will have container 2. I have told to create 2 replicas. 2 replicas will come up. These IP addresses are first of all private and they are not static. They are dynamic in nature. So if my customers have to connect, even if I give them a port number, so this is my worker node. In that, if I publish a port number and I'll say my pods will listen on this port number, that will not work. Pod is just like a wrapper on container. So don't get confused. On the operating system level, it would be called as processes. On Docker level, it would be called as containers. On Kubernetes level, we have just put a wrapper on top of it and we call it as a pod. That's nothing big deal about it. Okay. So I can say that this container would be listening on host port, say, I'll give a number 32,030 or something because Kubernetes takes the range beyond that. And I can say this guy is listening on 30,031. If I give this numbers and I ask you to browse the application, today my application is up, you're able to reach. Tomorrow, if my application goes down, you will not be able to reach. And how will I try to load balance the workload across replicas also, right? That becomes difficult. And that's the reason we don't expose our pods directly. Rather, in Kubernetes, you bring another component into picture, which is called as service. So every type of application will have a service associated to it. Service can be of type cluster IP, node port, and load balancer. Cluster IP, that means my service will get an IP address which will only resolvable within the cluster. It would be a private IP address. This IP address is static in nature. Comparing this with the load balancer and the virtual machine setup, which we normally have, you bring in a load balancer in front of multiple instances of your application running on VMs, right? So load balancer has a static IP address. Your request comes here and load balancer divides that workload or segregates, like distributes that workload across the virtual machines. It does health check and then sends the packet, right? And if this load balancer, this application is communicated from app 1 sitting inside my network itself, then this load balancer will have internal IP address. If a user sitting outside is communicating, then this IP address has to be a public IP address. So here also same way. If I want to expose this pods to the outside cluster, I need a public IP. If I want to expose this pods within the cluster, I just need a private IP. Private IP word is replaced with something called as cluster IP because multiple, within the cluster, everything is a private network. That's the reason you can say this is a private IP. Now, this would be a combination. Whenever you set up a pod, you will have a service associated to it always created. Now we were saying this pod has to communicate out. So I will tag a port number on the host machine. But this service is having private IP. So if I want to reach this service from outside, this is my worker node, okay? This line is my worker virtual machine, this line. So what happens in that case, if I am reaching on 32,031 from outside, the IP table rule will take me to claim application service, and claim application service will divide my workload to claim application pods. Distribution of the workload. There were two questions. Is it like we have to create a service for each pod or else a service that can handle odd pods? To answer that question, Sohail, claim application is one application. For that, you will have one service. Redis application is another application. You would have one service. SQL application is an application that will have one service. So every one type of application is having a service. And I can have multiple replicas of that same application behind that service. Similar pods go behind that service. These are all replica. This is also my claim application. This is also my claim application. If I have another application, say my Redis application, for that I will have again a Redis service. And if I want to expose this outside, I will get a port number. If I don't want to expose outside, I will not get a port number. Hopefully that point is clear. Many pods behind the service, but all similar pods, Sumit. All are replicas. When we gave that pod definition, this service, what it said, we will select a pod which would be labeled like this. And two pods are labeled like this, two replicas. That's the reason both of them will come behind that. This service to pod communication is done with the help of label and selector. Label is applied on the pod and service selects that label and gets that. So service work is to search all the pods in that cluster which is having that label. Now, app claim API and your front end. Whoever is having that IP address, it will pick up that and put it. And this pod may go down and we would get the replacement pod for it. Service IP address is not going to change. Because I'm exposing this out, I need a port number. This port is called as node port. This port is called as node port. So to access this, what I need my worker node's IP address and the node port number. Would you like to give like this to your customers? No, right? This is not what we give to our customers. Then what do we give to our customers? We normally give a public IP address. So for that, what we do, we will bring in one more component. Sorry for the size of the eraser. This is a new app which I've tried to use a few days. I don't know how to increase the size of the eraser at present. Okay. So here I'll get in a cloud load balancer. I will get my customers, happy customer, access the public IP address of this load balancer. And this load balancer will have backend of virtual IP address of the, worker node's IP address in the node port. So what happens in this case? If my user is reaching this load balancer's IP address, this load balancer's backend pool, we normally set a backend pool for the load balancer. Backend pool is nothing but worker node with this node port. And here, from here, the stitch up is already done. Whenever packet comes here, we know that it has to go to this service. And whenever the packet comes to this service, we know that it can distribute across these two pods. That is attained. And that's the reason we are creating application of our load service of our load balancer type. When you create a resource in the cloud and you want to expose it with a cloud load balancer, let it be any cloud. If you give the service as type load balancer and your cluster is integrated with your cloud load balancer, automatically a load balancer would get created in your cloud and that stitch up would happen. That stitch up would automatically happen. I would like to test my deployment once and see whether it is working or not, right? I would like to test my deployment once before automating and see if it is working or not. Now, there were a few questions. I'll just stop for a while and pick up the questions and then proceed ahead because the questions will become irrelevant. So Ankit had asked, what's the difference between a cluster IP and a node port? Ankit, I think I've explained it after you have asked that question. In case that doubt is still there, just let me know. Cluster IP will be having just internal connectivity. My application is only reachable from within the cluster. Node port is grabbing port number on the host machine so that you can have external connectivity. Hope that is clear. Now, generally for a database, do we have multiple pods? Stateful applications also, Jayaprakash, can be deployed with Kubernetes, but for that, we don't use deployment type of controller because databases work a little bit different. I need to have master and slave type of replicas, and that's the reason we would not have them deployed as deployment type of controller. So if you see Kubernetes is just a study of different types of controllers. To deploy different types of applications, you would have different types of controllers in place. Like for stateful application, there is a controller type called a stateful sets. So we can create replicas, but the replicas behaviors are different. One replica is a read replicas are there, write replicas are there. And that's the reason you would not go ahead and create with a deployment. But yes, you can have multiple replicas in it. Now there was one more question with that itself. We can create multiple replicas for databases and add mount external volume as storage. Yes, Sumit, correct. Hope you were answering the question, I think. If we have on-premises cluster, can we do a replace of cloud load balancer? Yes, Nilanjal, there is something called as metal load balancers. We can use that. So if you want to look for it, just Google metal load balancer. Metal, non-metal, METAL, that metal load balancer. Can we deploy different containers having different runtime on the same pod? Yes, your pod can have multiple containers inside it. At present, our pod is having a single container. Normally you don't club multiple containers together because we want to suffice the concept of microservices. And microservice talks about keeping one logic inside a container. So I would not keep my Redis and my say SQL pod and my front-end pod inside multiple containers in the same pod, we will not do that. It's not um, expected to do that way. That would be a bad architecting. Okay, so fine. So I'll go ahead and do one thing. I'll go ahead and deploy this for now. For deploying, we will have to do a few things. From this machine, if I want to interact to my Kubernetes cluster, I'll have to execute command so that it can interact with my Kubernetes cluster. Let me just grab that command. AZAKS get credentials is the command in which you give the name of your resource group and the cluster with which you would like to interact. So understand that this is a workstation. From here, if you are trying to interact to your cluster, you will have to specify to which cluster are you sending the commands, kubectl commands, right? I may not be just working on one cluster throughout the day. It could be that I'm having multiple clusters. So here, I would give the resource name and I would give the cluster name. With this, what would happen? Let me just go and fetch the name of the cluster to execute this command and come back. K8 as demo. So you can see here, it is actually fetching something. What is it fetching? It is fetching this file. Let's go ahead and catch this file and see. This file, whenever I execute kubectl command, it looks for a variable called as kubeconfig. That variable is set with this configuration. That variable is set with this configuration. If you want to use any other configuration file, you can supply the name of the configuration file. If you don't, it will go to .kube folder and look for the config file and it will pick up the configuration. This configuration file says that this is the cluster serving on this API server. You can see this is the name of the cluster, the DNS which is showing up, whichever I have highlighted. That is our API server. And managed Kubernetes, you can't see the master, so you don't have any connections to your API server. You just know this. That's the maximum information you get. So this is my API server, which is there. This is the name of the cluster. And in that, you have a user context. In that, you would have a user context, sorry, a user named this with this client certificate and with this client key is going and executing the command on this cluster that it is meaning at. So whenever you are executing kubectl command, let me clear out the screen and say kubectl get nodes. This cluster had 2-node cluster. Let's go and verify that. 2 nodes. So that is this. And here you can see both the nodes are showing up as ready. If you do kubectl get all, if something is running in the default namespace that you can see. How we have resource groups in Azure, like that you can think we have namespaces in Kubernetes. I can segregate a logical set of linked workloads and keep them inside a namespace. And I can go ahead and even assign roles. Like I can say there is a namespace for test in which, say, for example, Ram, Nilanjal, and Rakesh are the users. And I have a namespace for me, Shrishti, and say, for example, Sohail. We are the 3 guys, those who would be working on just dev namespace. So when we log in, we will not be able to see any workload from test. And same way, if Nilanjal is logging in, he will not be able to see any workload from dev. So how we have role-based access control on resource groups and segregation of resources, same way namespaces are there. If you don't specify the name, then no namespaces would be there. This is the one which I had just deployed for checking if things are working fine or not. I had created a development namespace. kubectl get ns is the command for getting up the namespaces as well. So multiple namespaces can be created. You can go ahead and create a namespace as test. And when you list it, you will find it. If you want to deploy it in test namespace, you would be able to deploy in test namespace as well. So at present, the resources are not yet deployed. I will go ahead and first do one thing. kubectl create -f, and I'll give the name of the file, and I'll say -n test. I want to deploy this application which we have in the deployment.yaml in test namespace. So kubectl get all -n test is going to list all the resources which are running in test namespace. Had I not saved the file with 2 replicas? Let me see. Okay, it just has 1 replica at present. So there was few questions with respect to replicas. I'll answer those questions now. Creating more replicas copies will cost more. Understand that these replicas are nothing but containers inside the worker nodes. Worker nodes are 2. You are getting charged for the worker node. Whether you run a container, you don't run a container, they are charging you for the worker node as per the cost of that virtual machine which you have picked up. If you run 10 replicas and you're able to accommodate that in 2 nodes, you're not going to charge. They are not going to charge you. But what did I specify? If my worker nodes are getting completely occupied, go and scale the worker nodes from 2 to 5. Imagine I say run 1,000. A lot of people started to do Mediclaim. My application became hit. So 1,000 people are requesting at one point in time for the claims. Then I need a lot of instances to serve them. When I need a lot of instances, my pod would scale and it becomes 1,000 instances of the application pods. Behind the service, there are 1,000 pods running. It can't be accommodated in 2 nodes. At that point in time, node number 3, node number 4, node number 5 comes up. Then what would happen in that case? When multiple nodes come up, that time it starts charging us. That is the time in which it would be charging. So charges are not as per the copies directly proportional to number of replicas which we are spinning up. Rather, it is with number of nodes which we are having in the cluster. So I'll just dump this. Okay, I'm just doing a create and that's the reason it says, yeah. Let me just pick up this and see if my application is running. It's no more listening on port number 5000. It is listening on port number 80. How do I know that? You can see here. This is load balancer's IP address. This is my service internal IP address. This is my load balancer's IP address. This is my load balancer's port number. This is my 32110 is the container port number. I'll just try to map this over here so that we have clarity. So here we can see the cluster IP address, that is this 10.0.244.202. Node port number is this 32110. Load balancer's IP address is this. So a cloud load balancer got created. The public IP address of it is 20.42.29.49. That is this IP address. You're reaching here. It takes you to the node on port number 32110. And from there, service and pod are reachable. Now, hopefully everyone understood this. Just give me 1 second. The monitor is not working in which I could see your chat. There is a power outage, I think. That's the reason. Just give me 1 second. So this connectivity is being stitched up. Let me bring that chat window here itself. How do I get that? Okay. Just give me 1 second, guys. Sorry for it. Vivek or Rashmita, if you guys are there, can you just give me 1 second? Okay. Yeah.
Sure, Mamta, you can take it.
Came back. Sorry, the extended monitor was not working because power fluctuation. Sorry for that. Yeah, it's back now. So there were some questions. Okay, Sumit is answering a lot of questions. Thanks, Sumit. So here, just to know if we deploy containers in different part, how can we establish communication between them? Communication here is being done with. We have, instead of Eureka, we are using etcd, and kube proxy is normally used for setting up that communication path. So there is not only one component which does that. There is core DNS, there is kube proxy, there is etcd. There are a lot of components which help us attain that. How to save the context in file other than kubeconfig. So you can just have this file saved, and you don't want, you copy that file with a different name, Shrishti, right? Shrishti, and then use that file with -f option while creating it. It would work that way. You don't have to always overwrite the same file. So the deployment is done. Application is accessible as well. Here you see I have not used port number 5000 because my load balancer's port number is 80 at present, and I'm reaching here. From here, we are connected to the node port, and we are connected further from there. So application deployment manually has worked well. We have done the deployment. We will go ahead and deploy that with a pipeline now. It's time to do the last part of it, which is the pipeline deployment. So let me open up my login to dev.azure.com. This is the repository in which you have the Docker file, the deployment file, and your .NET code. And then you have the pipeline section. Here I've already have a pipeline, but I'll not use that. I'll create a pipeline from scratch so that you people learn how to create a pipeline. in YAML from scratch. That's the reason I'll do that. So I'll go ahead and create a new pipeline here. I'll be creating Azure Repos YAML pipeline. So few things about the pipeline now. Let me bring up a new page. So code is residing here. We are going to the pipeline section. Pipeline would be doing build and doing deployment or release. You can do both the things in the same pipeline if you wish, or you can keep it separate. I'm having a single YAML file in which I'll do both. Now, when we want to build, we would need a temporary server in which we build it. That is called as agent. This agent can be grabbed either from Microsoft or it can be your server in which you want to build. So you can say it as a self-hosted agent. So to set up that, I'll get this window that side. So to set up that, I go under my organization settings. I go to the billing section. In the billing section, you can change this billing and you can make this as 1-1. It was 1-1 actually. You can make this as 1-1. You're saying that at one point in time, I'll execute one job in my Microsoft hosted agent, or I would run one job in my self-hosted agent. So you make these changes and you click on save. Then on your project level, you will get options to do the parallel jobs. Project also has a setting. Going back again, I think I went too quick. So you have project settings here. In the pipeline, you have parallel jobs. If you have given there 1-1 over there, automatically here you will get that 1-1 agent can be taken by you. So that configuration is to be set by everyone. So this is the project which we have, in which code is there, in which we have configured the pipeline. Now it's time to go ahead and create a new pipeline. Every pipeline needs an agent for the build, but pipeline needs trigger as well. Pipeline needs trigger as well. So you need a trigger for the pipeline. Sorry, the mouse symbol is coming something weird. Yeah. So you need a trigger for the pipeline. What would be the trigger? So trigger is a code change. Whenever there is code change, I will trigger the pipeline or I will schedule the pipeline. Two options. Whenever there is a code change, I want the pipeline to run, or I have scheduled that every day 3 p.m. my pipeline will run, either of the options. So that is the trigger. Trigger is like an input for a pipeline. Then whatever that pipeline is doing, that will have. So every pipeline has a trigger, which is nothing but the input. And then it has tasks, which it has to execute. So this pipeline tasks, I can say I have a job. In that, I will have multiple tasks like this. Task 1, task 2, like that, multiple tasks. If you don't want to make a job, you directly want to make a task, that also can be done. So there are several ways of segregating your pipeline into multiple varieties. And you can create this pipeline using the classical editor. If you're new, you can use the classical editor or you can code it with YAML. So we are looking the YAML format at present. So I'll say this is the code where my code is residing. and this is the repository name where my code is residing. I want to configure my pipeline. If there is an existing YAML file which is already present, you can pick up this. I don't want to pick up that. I want to pick up a plain pipeline, which is like a blank pipeline. And if you want to pick a template as well, that also can be done. Like I know what task I'm going to do. I'm going to build and push an image to Azure Container Registry. So I can pick up this. This looks to be more relevant for me. I can pick up that particular template and I can go ahead and say that I'll be using this template. I can do that. I'm not going with that. I'll go with a scratch one, which will actually not have anything. If you see, this is a dummy task which is there. There's nothing in it. It just says hello world. This is a scratch pipeline which I have. Okay. So if you people have any questions, please put. I'm just not looking into that other window where the questions are coming up. I'll just explain the pipeline. And later when I've done with the pipeline creation, I'll pick up the questions for you from you people. Okay. So how you want the trigger to happen? In my repository, I'll open this in one more tab. My repo has a master branch. Whenever there is a change in the master branch, I want the trigger to happen. Or here you can write a word schedule and you can write, cron job every minute, every 1 hour, so and so day of the month. That cron tab pattern you can give over here and you can schedule as well. I'm going with every change. Then you have the pool which says what agent you would be picking up to do these actions. Now a temporary server in between is needed. Someone has to do a Docker build. We did Docker build on our CentOS virtual machine, but that way it will not work. That way it will not work, right? I need a temporary server which will go and do Docker build, which will go and interact with my Kubernetes cluster. My Azure DevOps server will not do that. That's the reason we are asking for an Ubuntu latest instance. So this is the instance which would be helping us do the build. Now coming to the script part. Here I'll say echo. I will remove that and I'll say starting Docker build. You can give the name for each of the tasks. So this is just a name which is coming. There's nothing else. This is just the name which comes. Then you can write multiple tasks as well. Like I want to write a task for, I'm just deleting this. This is just chunk. How do I develop the task that is important? What all things I want to do? I want to do a Docker build. I want to log into my Azure Container Registry. I want to push my images to Azure Container Registry. So let me see what all tasks I can pick up. You can see here on the right-hand side, there is a small show assistant button. I've clicked on that so that I can pull up the skeleton of my task. So if I go ahead and type Docker, you can get options for what all things you can do from here. What all things you can do from here. Like I would be able to deploy or communicate with my Azure Container Registry. Here you can see there is something coming in the drop down. How did that come in the drop down? Let's go ahead and even do that. So it's time for understanding one more stuff. Now my Azure DevOps needs to communicate to Azure Container Registry, needs to communicate to AKS, needs to communicate with my Azure subscription. For that, you will have to create connection here. In my pipeline, when it asks, you will not go and give these details, right? Automatically, it should authenticate. So that connection is called as service connection. This is one service, this is one service. They are communicating with each other, and that's the reason name service connection. Now, this service connection, when we create it this way. I'm going to the other tab for creating the service connection. Just keep an eye on it. I am going to the project settings. And here you have the option in the pipeline called a service connection. You can see I've created 3 of them. I'll go ahead and create now to show you. One is Azure Resource Manager. For my Azure subscription, I have to give Azure Resource Manager. Go next. I'll say create service principal automatically. It will automatically look for my subscription. It's asking me to log in. I'll go ahead and log in. Let me see what was the ID. If it authenticates right, here it will pull up the details. Here it will pull up the details. I'm saying in this subscription, in this resource group, you set my connection. So I have authenticated now in the another window. So automatically these things came. I can give a name for it. I'll say subscription connection. I'll save it. So how this was created, I have right now created one for you to show that. It is just setting up the connectivity. And here, if I select this, any pipeline which is there in this project would be able to use that. That's the advantage of it. Here, later, if I want to edit something, I can go ahead and do this. I've created this one now. Same way for Azure Container Registry, if I have to create, I'll go to Docker Registry. In Docker Registry, there are different types of registries. If I want to connect with hub.docker.com, I can give this. I want to connect with Azure Container Registry, so I'm selecting up that. It is picking up my subscription details, and it will try to load my registry details here. If there is an Azure Container Registry already present, it will show up over here. Let me see if it is popping up any window which I'm not realizing. It should actually pop up that login window like last time. So it's taking a while to load it. I don't know why. So here I'll show you my connection, which I've already created. Automatically, this name would pop up if the subscription is connected, right? It should come up. I have selected this container registry name. I've given a name to it, and I've clicked on save. So this has been created. Same way, you should have a AKS connection as well. To create a Azure Kubernetes connection, you look for service connection type Kubernetes, go to next. And in your subscription, it will try to look for a Kubernetes cluster. And once it has found that Kubernetes cluster, it will tell you if you're looking for any specific namespace in that cluster where you want to deploy, you can go ahead and give that as well. Showing you my AKS service connection. So this is my same subscription. This is the cluster. And I'm saying I would deploy in development namespace. And I've given a name to it and saved this connection. So these connections would be used in pipelines. Now coming to the pipeline section, I'm selecting my container registry service connection. I'm selecting the container registry service connection. With that, what would happen? It knows to which Azure Container Registry with what authentication you got to listen. You got to go and communicate. Here, I don't want to build and push. I'll first log in. So I'll say login. I'll say login. That's it. This is my first task. I'm logging in. Say add. A task came in here. You can see here, a task came in here. This is the input. Input is the container registry and the command. So to this ACR with this connection, it will go and it will try and log in. This should succeed for me to actually go ahead and push. So the task which is being used is this. You will not change the name of that. Rather, you will give a display name for this task. You will say login to ACR. This is my name. When you add task, you can go ahead and execute and verify it. I'm not doing that. I'll add 2 tasks and then finish the build and then try and execute it. And then add the deployment task. Again, I'll go and search for word Docker. You can see here, Docker build and push images. I'll select that. I'll go and select the same container registry. Here, repository name. If you want to give a repo name for it, you can give a repo. What would be the name of the repo which you would be creating? Like I will say claims API should be the repo name. I'll do build and push in it. Where is the Docker file? You can give the location. I'll just go and verify what was my Docker file name, how it was named. Docker file was small Docker file and it was present in the parent directory itself. So if I give this, it will not work. I'll say /Docker file, where it has to go and find the Docker file it is asking. And you can tag it as latest. You can also tag it with the build ID. You can give both of them. And this would be added as a metadata. Images would be there and you just go ahead and push the image to the container registry, this one. So build would be done from this Docker file and push would be done to this ACR. All parameters we have addressed. Keep the mouse in the correct place and say add. Now give a name for it. This is build and push. Let me give a different name, say -a or APIs, because that repo is already existing. So this is the one. It should build and push the image. I'm tagging it in 2 different ways. So this should work. I'll go ahead and click on save. Display name without a single quote. Now it is fine. Go ahead and commit. This should trigger the pipeline. Let's go and see. It's grabbing the agent now. It's trying to grab the agent. Agent has been got. It has initialized. It is checking out my code in that server. It started to do the Docker build, the echo statement happened. It has logged into my ACR. This has seen success. That means it could communicate my ACR. And now we are doing the build. We are doing the build. So here, when we do the build, it is actually literally going and doing whatever we did. And it will push the image to my Azure Container Registry. It will push the build to my Azure Container Registry. So by the time this is actually doing, we can go ahead and enhance our pipeline further. I'll not save it. I'll just enhance it. After build succeed, let me see if there are any questions. So he'll just remind me that Eureka thing at the end. I'll explain that. I've just moved from that point. So just keep that on the mind. Where we added the login credentials for the ACR. When you created the service connection, that time I logged in. You saw that a pop-up came and I logged in, right? So that time it has taken up my credentials. If service connection is created, now that service connection is used for authentication. You can see here, the name of the service connection is used. And what does the service connection have? Service connection has to which ACR, with what name you would be getting it. To this subscription, to this container registry, my connection is done. If you have unit test cases, you can go ahead and run the unit test cases. You need to have those tasks populated over here, NUnit, JUnit test cases. You can go ahead and look for them. You can go ahead and add that. So let me see if the pipeline has succeeded. Yes, pipeline has succeeded. Build and push has happened. So let's get into our Azure Container Registry and see. If repository is created, yes, it's there. And image is also pushed. Image with one tag as build number and one tag as latest. Two tags are being pushed. So this would be the image we would be using. Now going back to the same pipeline, I'll enhance that to do a deployment. Look forward Kubernetes here. Deploy to Kubernetes. I'll pick up this. Yeah, this looks good. This task is looking good. I'll pick up this task. And I'll go ahead and select my connection, AKS service connection, which I have created as a communication towards my AKS. I can give the namespace in which I want to deploy, like deploy development namespace. Then I can go ahead. Okay, I'm not getting command and all option. Okay, let me pick up another task. There were multiple Kubernetes. I think I chose up this. Let me select this. Yeah, this looks good. So I'll pick up this. What command I want to execute? I want to execute kubectl apply command. If I want to give any arguments, I can go ahead and give any arguments, or I have a deployment file, I can give that deployment file. So I have the configuration file, right? And I need to give the configuration file path. So configuration file is present in slash folder itself. It's called as deployment.yml. So I'm giving it over here. This is all set. Nothing has to be given extra. So this will go ahead and deploy my code to this Azure Kubernetes cluster. Let's go ahead and add this task. Close this assistant and just verify. Command is apply. User configurations, configuration file. Secret type was mentioned Docker registry. If I want to change any configuration here, okay, yeah. So I'm just saying that with which subscription I am picking up my Azure Container Registry. I'll just click on add that. I had missed that. So here, this is the AKS needs to talk to ACR. So I'm saying that this is the ACR from which you have to pull that image. That's the reason I gave that subscription and the container registry type and the container registry name. So in this file, when it says go and pull the image, it has to pull the image from a destination, right? So that I'm specifying. It doesn't understand there is a task before that and you have pushed the image in that it doesn't understand. So that is over here. You can give a display name for this as well. Let me copy this and go ahead and hopefully things look good. Let's see if it deploys. First time we are doing, so it is expecting that authorization for the Azure Pass. I'm going ahead and giving the authorization. Then it would proceed. From next time onwards, it will not ask for it. So validation is done one time. Let me see if there are questions. Meantime, how can we stop the website in IIS in the target web server before the pipeline job starts running so that the job doesn't fail due to bin file locking by work process? You just want to stop that application which is running, right? You want to bring down the web server which is actually getting deployed there. Then in case of containers, you will not find that issue. Because containers are redeploying. It will never be that the same container instance will get upgraded. Okay. In containers, Rajesh, there is nothing called as upgrading the same container or updating the same container. In virtual machines, you do that. In containers, new instance of that container will come up and older would go off once the newer one is stable and the traffic will go to the newer one. That is how. I already have the pipeline running here. That's the reason this guy is not showing up. So let's see this pipeline. That pipeline didn't execute because one agent we have asked for. So both the pipelines are same. I just recreated that for you people. So here it's going to do the deployment and deployment is done. I'll pick up the questions and then go to the deployment part. Can we have custom tasks in the pipeline created by the Azure DevOps? Yes, you can write your custom tasks as well, but either they should have a plugin from the marketplace or somewhere. Otherwise, it will not understand those tasks. Sumit, you had asked how we can give input from the other pipeline. I'll show you that in a while. Can we add rollout task in case of release failed to Kubernetes? Yes, you can also add a rollback task as well. Here itself, you need to look for options in the tasks, which task is providing you that option, that particular task you can choose. How to use output of a pipeline? Yeah. Sumit, I remember that question. I would add that question in a while. I would show you that pipeline, similar pipeline in my other project, and I'll give you. How can we add environment variables? Environment variables can be added from here. You can create environment, say environment as test, and you can add variables from here, checks from here, or else you can also add variables from the variable group section in the library. You can add multiple variables here and you can use it. So there are a lot of questions, advanced questions with respect to the pipeline. So I'll take you to one more setup of mine. Just give me 1 second. This is the pipeline in which, this is a project in which there are so many pipelines. You can see I'm building Sentinel through this. This is one pipeline whose input is being expected in other pipelines. That when this pipeline passes, I want to execute the other pipelines. So the pipeline name is script CI, scripts CI, scripts with an S. So if I want to say that relevance to others, I go ahead and say it like this. I'm getting that from there. And same way in the trigger also, you can say that the trigger would be the script CI. Like this, how you refer pipelines. You give the name of the pipeline, you give the source for the pipeline. This is the folder where the pipeline is present, and this is the source. This is how two pipelines can be integrated. Now coming to the environments and variable, let me see if I have a project for that. Let me just recollect where I would have done that. Yeah. So environments have been created here. Dev environment is there, stage environment is there. And here in the pipeline, I have multiple environments addressed with the keyword environment you can address. You can see here, if you address dev environment, you will go to dev environment and you can pick up the variables and all those things from there. You can specify the variables here as well as where's, or else you can specify the variables here. You can create variables here as well. So we have not included any variables, and that's the reason I didn't show up that. Otherwise, variables can be included from here, or you can go to variables group and include the variables. So these were the few questions. Rahul and Sumit, I think your questions are answered. Now let me go ahead and check. This guy is running. Let me see what is the image it has picked up. kubectl describe pod. Okay, I have to give hyphen in development. Pod word I've written twice. It is picking up the image from here. You can see here, it has gone ahead and picked up the image, and application has got deployed. So the pipeline has also succeeded. Any questions with respect to any other thing in the pipeline, just let me know. Let me grab a few other details. People had asked for LinkedIn ID and all that stuff. Any other questions which are there? Just
I think there was one question.
I want to know how to performance test in with hosted apps. A performance test and all that. For that, you would have to use tools. All those things has to be incorporated in the pipeline itself. So you can add tasks corresponding to that. You will have to have Apache JMeter type of tasks to be included. If tasks are not present by default, we can go ahead and say, include extensions from the marketplace, you can see there is a shopping bag symbol here. You can go to manage extensions and you can look for browse marketplace and you can grab extensions from here. Like there is a extension, sorry, I'm writing target trigger. This I use. Trigger task, trigger Azure pipeline, DevOps pipeline. This has Sumit was asking a question, right? One pipeline triggering other pipeline. This plugin is very good for this. Sumit, you can just make a note of it. This plugin is good. I use this plugin. Then suppose I want to integrate a Terraform task. I want to integrate any other task. I can go ahead and look for those tasks, find the pipelines. So JUnit test cases, if I want to run JTest automation, or I want to run any other, any type of stuffs I want to do, any particular task. If that task is not found here, like here also, the way we to search the task is, where is it? You can look for a lot of tasks are there inbuilt. I want to run a script. I want to run Xcode. I want to have Ruby code, Python code. I want to SSH. Lot of tasks. I want to deploy it in a web app. I want to deploy it with, say, Kubernetes. I want to deploy it as a virtual machine. IaaS deploy tasks are there. You can choose the relevant task and use it. So that you don't get troubled by it. You get all the options for it. What if happens when we run the failed jobs and it gets when I have Azure built pipelines with Docker images are being created and pushed to a private registry. Sometime my build pipelines fails with messages shown below. What is that? Okay, so see the file which you are executing here, the Docker file, the context is not properly being created in that case, and that's the reason you are getting that error, Sumit. In Is it failing only sometimes and the same pipeline executes in rest of the places? Is it like that? Like once in a while it fails, or and every time when it fails, it is the same error? Okay. I'll check on that. You just ping me on LinkedIn. If it fails every time, it will make sense. Once in a file failing, context will not be created in all the time. So need to check why it is failing. I was just trying to access the application for you people. My load balancer's IP address, I've picked up kubectl get all hyphen and development. This IP address I've picked up and tried accessing here. So application is deployed in an automated fashion. Coming to the communication with help of Eureka, right? To be very frank, I have not used Eureka. Eureka is a tool like contributed to the open source community by Netflix. Uh, so when the communication happens, it's not as simple as this. Like core DNS is there, which does the DNS resolution. HCD is there, which is having the key value store of what is running where. That information is maintained here, and kubeproxy is there, which is going and writing the IP table rules. Whenever a pod is getting created in a pod, in a node, that time this guy is modifying the details on that particular worker node. And core DNS is also maintaining that entry. And one entry is maintained in etcd. All these three in combined would contribute to the communication over like this. Like for example, if you want to look for pod to pod communication, imagine there is one worker node in which I have pod 1 and there is another type of pod which is pod 2. Now they will get an IP address from within the bridge type of network. So they will have a private IP address, both of them. And we know that we don't use their IP addresses. So I'm creating a service here. A service IP address is blocked and backend to that service is P1. This is P1 service, and I'll create a P2 service as well. And backend of it would be P2 pod. So when P1 wants to talk to P2 in this node, the range is, say, for example, 10.30.0.0/16. This guy got an IP 10.30.0.4, and this got an IP 10.30.0.6, for example. Now, when the packet originates from P1, it would be destined for P2 service. So packet will come here. There is a CNI pod running in every node in the cluster. It's called a CNI pod. It comes here. This CNI pod looks into it and understands that this service entry would be matched. So IP table will say, okay, P2 SVC, whenever a packet is coming, it will forward to P2. That is 10.30.0.4. CNI pod will look into it. 10.30.0.4 is within this node itself, within this worker node itself. So again, it will push back with that. So when your packet started, destination was service IP address, P2 service. After that, it is overwritten as destination as P2's IP address. And when P2's IP address is written, it will go here. If this P2 would not have been on the same node and it would have been on a different node altogether, like worker node 2, there would have been a P3 and there would have been a service for P3, which will have the backend for P3. Now your packet originating is having destination of P3 service. When packet comes here, this guy sees the packet and understands that P3 SVC should forward the packet to P3, right? This entry is actually maintained in every node in the cluster, and that's the work of your kubeproxy. To write these entries, kubeproxy is doing that. And whenever these IPs are coming up, that time DNS entries and that time the HCDs are updated. So CNI pod looks into it and understand that P3 range is not in 1030 range. In this node, everyone got IP address of 1040. So this guy's IP address is 1040.0.5, for example. So it saw that packet, understood. Now destination has become 1040.0.5. It's not on this node. This packet would be wrapped up by the node's IP address and sent. So packet will go from this node to this node. This network is called as the overlay network, which is connecting worker node 1 and worker node 2. And that IP address, node IP address, one more, there is a, you say a small header is attached to it now. So packet will come here. When packet comes here, this will be removed and packet would be sent to P3. So this is happening with the help of DNS, with the help of HCD, with the help of kubeproxy. All three have to contribute, otherwise communication will not happen. So if you think if you just pick Eureka, things will work, it will not work. DNS has to be there, kubeproxy has to be there, and then pod-to-pod communication or across node or within node can happen. Hopefully, I've answered all the questions. Any questions which is pending, I've shown the application is also up. Someone was asking for history. How do I take the history and put it? Tell me. Putting that on the chat. Hopefully it goes, yeah. Rahul had a question. I'm having an issue while initializing Cube. Initial timeout 40 minutes. It seems like the kubelet isn't running or healthy. The HTTP call. This is happening in which setup, Rahul? If you can tell that, what is the setup in which this is happening? The code I had already pinged. I'll go ahead and ping the code once again. The entire code was pinged by me. Let me just give you the code once again. So you people can clone my repository. And pipeline, everything is there in this. You can use that. No. Ubuntu T2 large, I'm not asking that. I'm asking Rahul, it's a AKS cluster. What type of cluster is that? It's a plain Kubernetes cluster. It's a AKS cluster. And in one node alone, the kubelet is not initializing, or in the entire cluster, the kubelet is not initializing? These questions are a little bit difficult to debug. We will need to have good information about your cluster, then commenting on that would make more sense. Just let me know how that cluster is, like it's a AKS cluster, it's a non-AKS cluster and all. I don't know, this is showing up very weird. Let me just paste it here and then copy. That was my LinkedIn handle. Okay, you are bringing up your own cluster, correct? Then this is a non-managed cluster. If you're doing a kube ADM in it, that is a non-managed cluster. Okay, in that kubelet is not coming up on any of the nodes, or it is not coming up on the master node. Just let me know that as well. And ping me on LinkedIn. I'll help you out with that. This issue can't be debugged in 3 to 5 minutes. So if you want, I've just pinged my LinkedIn handle as well. Twitter handle. To be very frank, I'm very bad at Twitter. I rarely go. So let me see if I can log in. Okay, there were a few more questions. I'm coming with .NET developer background, having a... Okay, then you will have to pick up a little bit administration's knowledge if you want. It's not like DevOps is just for administrators, but yes, DevOps is having a lot of opportunities. If you want to switch, it's easier to switch. You can switch easily. So if you want ahead and switch to DevOps, you can certainly go ahead and do that. It's not that it's very difficult. You can even, instead of switching to, say, DevOps, why don't you go ahead and try for the architect, Azure architect, and all those roles also. Having AZ204 certification and all would also help, right? Thanks a lot. Is kube proxy etcd handled by master? Kube proxy sits in every node in the cluster, so it would be not handled by the master as such. But yes, the entries which we were talking about, that would be instructed by the masters to upgrade. So they are, even though running on the worker nodes, but they are processes which are handled on a kube system level. What exactly is kube system level is that it is Kubernetes system processes. So it would be handled by the master itself. You don't have to actually worry about it. So in AKS, you will not be troubled by kube proxy or any other stuff. Any other doubts? Anything else?
Hello, Mamta.
Hello, Mamta.
This is
This is
Jayaprakash.
Jayaprakash.
Yeah, Jayaprakash.
So earlier, you have created Azure this thing, right? Like Kubernetes services on the Azure portal, right? So when you have created it, you have specified that there are a number of pods, right? Like there is a maximum limit where we had 250 is upper limit, and but we prefer like so as a standard we have given 110, right? So sorry, somehow yeah. So but so we have 110 pods, but when we have created our YAML file, like we have created only for two replicas, right? Like so how that relates actually, like so we while we when we have created 110 pods, but so we are actually giving only actually are we going to use only two pods in it? Is that right actually? Or
Yes, when we say replica, they are individual pods, but just that they do the same thing. So if I'm saying 110 pods can be run on one node in the cluster, that means two replicas are two individual pods, but they are look-alike pods. I would be able to max scale my claim application on one node to 110 instances of it at this point.
so it's up to me like to specify like how many replicas to be run on the node, right? So through the YAML file, is that right?
Correct. So
Okay.
in YAML file, you say, suppose claim API application was one application. In that, I told I'll spin two pods. Then if one is running on worker node 1 and one is running on worker node 2, in my entire cluster, I could run 220 pods. 110 on worker node 1, 110 on worker node 2. Now I have utilized two out of that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Mohammed Sohail is asking one question. Good. There is a book called as The Kubernetes Book. That book is really nice by Nigel. There's a writer called as Nigel. That book is really nice. You can read that book. For Kubernetes basics and all, that book is really good. The Kubernetes book it is. Yes. You're not able to do Git clone? Who's this AK? You're unable to do Git clone? Then let me go ahead and give you my link on the Git as well. It is there. That is also a public repo. Just like go ahead and give that 1 second. The Azure repos is not opening, you're saying? Then pick this link. This also has the same code. Yeah, for you, sorry, I may pronounce your name wrong, so I'm not pronouncing it. So because you come from a Windows and a Linux administrator background, DevOps would be certainly very relevant for you. So you can go ahead and start learning You can enroll for, say, Azure. If you want to make in Azure, right, you first go and do AZ104, then you can do AZ400, and you can top up that with a Kubernetes certification like CKA. That would be, those things are in huge demand these days. That would be making your profile good. So AZ104 is Azure Administrator, AZ400 is Azure DevOps Expert, and CKA is Certified Kubernetes Administrator. Thank you so much for such kind words that you people like the session. It's worth giving in case you people have liked it. Fascinating, okay. Azure DevOps was free to use till some time back, Jayaprakash. These days, if you have a subscription, you will, even for building the pipeline, you will have to give that subscription. You would not be able to build without a valid Azure subscription. So it's no more free. Thank you so much. There are many more sessions planned. You can look into the Azure Microsoft Reactors page and stay tuned for many more sessions. There are varied different speakers coming in and contributing to the community. So you can enjoy them all. Ashmita, for you, it would be AZ204 and then 303, 304 as the architect. 204 is a developer track, and then you can go for 303, 304, which is solution architect and then infra architect. Thank you so much. Yeah, doing CK or CKD would certainly help, Aryan. There are a lot of openings. If you know basic Azure, you can look for CK, CKD. If you've learned Kubernetes from basics, you can run that in any cloud. It's all the same. Ashmita, I think we are good. Shall we?
Yeah, do we have any more questions coming up? We'll have another, we can wait for another 2-3 minutes probably.
Rashmita has pinged up the event link and all. You people can go and check there. Rashmita, they are asking what's the next event. You have that handy.
Yes, let me just, share the registration link. You will get all the upcoming events from Microsoft Meetup page. I have already shared the link to it, but then I'll just go ahead and share the next Saturday link one more time. Just give me 1 minute.
So Avinash, to answer your question, there are a lot of learning MS Learn tracks which are there, which can help you do that. Just Google Azure web server. You will find some documentation pages of Microsoft. They are really good. You can follow them step by step.
Yeah, just do the event check-in. You'll get those learning modules as well.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we can wrap up. We don't have any more questions. So thank you, Mamta, for the session, and thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free to do the event check in, and also please do share your feedback with us about today's session. It will help us choose our topics that better suit our audiences. Also, please visit our Microsoft Reactor Bengaluru meetup page for more upcoming session. Thank you all once again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Rashmita. Thanks, Vivek. Thank you, everyone.